Hey guys, welcome back. We are live. We're going to be going live today with Kelli White. Kelli is the author of the book, Napa Valley Then and Now. We're super excited to have her on today. Kelli is a very decorated writer. She has been in the industry for a little bit of time now. And so we're excited to have her on. She's won many awards now. And so just waiting for this to hook up. Hey, Kelli, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing well. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I've never done this before, so bear with me.
It's all good. Super easy. We very much appreciate it. Yeah, cool.
So far, so good. How about you?
So far, excellent. Awesome. So we've got a couple of things that I want to talk about today. So we'll jump right into it. Your career as a sommelier started in New York City. You have the bulk of your experience working at a restaurant called Veritas in Gramercy. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience there? What years you were there?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't the bulk of my experience by any means. It was just my first job as a sommelier, so it was really formative. I think that I've heard a lot of winemakers say that the first place you stage at is kind of the habits that you carry forward in the rest of your winemaking career. And I think the same is probably true of restaurant people. The things I learned at Veritas and just the basic body, memory and things like that are kind of what I carried for the rest of my career forward. So it was a really important place to me. But I was only there for about 2 years. I was there
Okay.
for the people that are familiar with Veritas. I was there basically the whole time that Pujan was chef. So sorry, I have a bowl full of apple and carrots to bribe my dog to keep quiet. So I'm gonna.
Whatever makes you comfortable. It's all good.
Okay. Thanks, good boy. Yeah, so I was there basically the tail end of 2008, '09, and 10. And it was
Is
just
that
a
where you
really.
met Scott?
No, I met Scott basically right when I first moved to New York, lay down, in 2005, because I was selling wine for a number of years. I moved to New York and I was selling wine. And he was actually really annoying because that's surprising. Uh, he was just a tough appointment to get. He was the wine buyer for Oriole back when it was on the Upper East Side in the townhouse, and my little company was just getting its kind of foothold in New York. I was kind of their first full-time salesperson, and Scott had one time bought one thing, and they were so sure he needed it again. And so even though he dodged me consistently, there was a lot of pressure to make it happen. And so I basically stalked him for a while until I got some orders, and then we struck up a friendship, and it wasn't until several years later that we started dating. So
Right.
we were in each other's orbits for a long time.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, in the introduction portion of your book, you kind of fast track us to the point where you and Scott were on your way out of the city, but you paint this picture of a city that had seen better times. What was going on in New York City right around the time that you guys left?
Yeah, it was crazy. So it was right after, it's kind of shades of today a little bit. It was right after the economic crash of 2008. So we were already talking about leaving New York when the job at Veritas came up. And then that was kind of a once in a lifetime job. And it paused our plans a bit. And so we, decided to stick around in New York for a while, but it was still in the back of our brains. And so after a couple of years of Veritas, when I really felt like, I learned a bunch and was ready to, kind of move on. And I think the restaurant closed shortly thereafter, through no fault of my own. But I think, the writing was kind of in the air. So we left, and it's interesting because I've been thinking about that time a lot right now because, that was a long time ago. That was 10 to 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And, I was a lot younger. Everybody was. And it really felt like there was going to be this kind of global economic revolution. You know, there were the 1% riots and just like this huge spike in petty crime. And it just, New York felt a lot more violent. A lot of restaurants were closing, a lot of wine lists were shrinking, a lot of sommeliers started leaving for like Hong Kong was really blowing up, you know, at the time. Basically, a lot of them were leaving major cities. And so we just thought, okay, you know, let's get out of here. It was just getting, it was difficult. And the sommelier profession changed, I think, during that time, especially for somebody of Scott's generation. You know, back in the day when he was getting going, being a sommelier, like you only touched a wine.
Yeah.
You made a lot more than you probably do today for the most part. And after the economic crash, it was kind of the rise of like the slashy jobs, right? Somm slash manager, somm slash bartender.
Sommager.
Yeah, we're still kind of in that today, and that's fine. You know, I don't think for most restaurants it's not necessary for wine to be, you know, to need its own like exclusive tender so much, because things did change, you know, after 2008, not as dramatically as I had thought. You know, I was surprised at the, here's a carrot. I was surprised at, you know, how things did eventually seem to bounce back in a lot of ways.
Right. So at that time, I know Germany was an option for you. You had a friend there that had a winery and needed some hands, but that got nixed by the government, correct?
Yeah, we decided, you know, we kind of had this, it really seemed like the restaurant industry was in a really dim place. And so we had this kind of powwow of, you know, okay, if this isn't the thing anymore for us, you know, what's the next thing? And Scott really wanted to learn how to make wine. And so we just wanted to move to wine country somewhere, but we didn't have, you know, any savings. We didn't have a way to support ourselves without working in restaurants. So it needed to be like a very special situation, or it needed to be kind of a wine country somewhere in the world that was polished enough to have, you know, white tablecloth restaurants that would, you know, need sommeliers. And so we just kind of started putting out feelers. We got job offers to work at a winery in the Mosel. They were going to pay us, put us up. It was going to be amazing. But, you know, it was a bad economy over there too. And they were, you know, Germany was kicking out a lot of foreign workers, especially in vineyards and wineries. And we just simply couldn't get a work visa. You know, we had somebody advocating for us on that end. We wanted to go, you know, got a lawyer and nothing. So, so that fizzled. And then eventually we got put in touch with Leslie Rudd, whom knew Scott through Oriole, but I had never actually met before. The GM and the chef at the time were married. I don't know if you ever met Allison and Stephen Yoder. They're, well, Allison Yoder, sorry, Stephen Rogers. Sorry, Stephen.
Sounds so familiar, but I can't put a face to the name.
Yeah, they were before your time. They ended up moving to Dallas, and they're just crushing it. They've opened a couple of restaurants there that are amazing, and they're doing really well. So, but they flew out to New York and interviewed us, and then convinced Leslie to hire a couple instead of one person. And so, so we came out to Napa and shared the job effectively, you know, for a while until, you know, my stuff went in a different direction.
Right. And you weren't drinking a lot of Napa Cab either. This was a definite departure from what you had been serving, what you had been drinking, what you had been surrounded by. What were the first days of working at Press like for you? What was the restaurant like? What was the wine program like?
Yeah, I was you know, Scott's from Seattle and I'm from Massachusetts. So I'd worked in the wine industry in Boston before moving to New York, and he was just more open-minded about domestic wine in general. I was a dyed-in-the-wool East Coast snob. You know, I really did not want to move to California. I you know, didn't only cared about Burgundy and Riesling. You know, just the whole stereotype. And so I didn't know a lot. I mean, at Veritas, we had some great brands, you know, and we had the owner, Park Smith, had great relationships with some Napa producers, you know, like Colgan and Harlan and Screaming Eagle and, you know, the top stuff. But that was all that I had experience with. You know, I didn't know much else. And so I felt really insecure about that. So, and Leslie was very, very clear from the beginning that he wanted it to be an all Napa wine list. Yeah. And so
Was it an all Napa wine list before you got there?
Yeah, it was, and it was a cute, great list. Allison had done it. Aaron Sullivan, who was at Acme for a long time, was also there briefly before us. But it was a little guy, like one page on the back of the menu, I think. When
Oh,
it was small, and so he wanted to take it to the next level. And really, if you consider the economy at the time, where all these restaurants, like I said, were closing, wine lists were shrinking, conspicuous consumption was decreasing, to have somebody with a big vision and that was willing to spend the money to put together like a world-class program was pretty unique. So Leslie, gave us enough rope to hang ourselves basically, and said he wanted to create an all Napa wine list, but it was going to be the best, it could be in the world, and basically go, and so we did.
yeah. So we're talking with Kelli White, author of Napa Valley Then and Now, and all-around talented industry professional. If you guys have questions for Kelli, feel free to utilize the question box just to the right of the comment area on the bottom of your screen. We'll be sure to sort through those at the end. Kelli, today I feel like there's this preconceived notion that Napa Valley wines don't age well. I come across people to this day at the restaurant who are blown away by the fact that a wine from the 1970s can still be good. What was it that initially, got you to invest your time and energy into building a list that was, based on the archive of Napa Valley? Was it a wine you tasted? Was it a cellar you visited? What was it?
It was a lot of different things. And I will just say first that whatever prejudice you're experiencing now, like imagine 10 years ago, it was, nobody believed, now you see critics doing retrospectives. It seems like, even the auction prices have risen considerably. There's better aftermarket value for these older wines, but it was crazy when we first started. Leslie was really skeptical, and the producers themselves were really skeptical. I mean, a lot of the people we really wanted to, in the beginning, buy directly from producer sellers when we could. Eventually we had to supplement from the auction market and private collectors. But the original goal was to kind of partner with the wineries that had libraries. And there was a lot of, what do you want with this old stuff, kind of, head scratchy,
Yeah.
I guess, like, I don't know how it's drinking. And we really didn't have any idea that it would be as successful as it was. But the idea came from a number of different things. I might be remembering this wrong, but I think that when we were getting ready to move across the country, we went back to Massachusetts, probably to stash some stuff at my mom's house. Sorry, Mom. And had dinner with some family friends who opened, of Scott's family friends, who opened a 1986 Coal Cedar Creek Cabernet. So not California,
Right.
but it was the oldest domestic wine I had had. They served it to us blind, and I mean, I was sure it was first growth Bordeaux. Really beautiful wine.
Yeah.
And it was just this kind of moment of like, okay, maybe there really is something to domestic Cabernets, that can really age. So we thought it might be an interesting angle. It wasn't necessarily the thesis of the list right away, but the idea of doing verticals rather than just the current release was always there. We just didn't really know that we could go back as far as we did. We really learned a lot. Like, so in the beginning, we'd buy, a small vertical, and then the older wines would be showing so great. We'd ask for older, and then we'd ask for older. And then we started experimenting with things like older Zinfandel and older Petit Syrah, which I think probably still today people look at you cross-eyed if you try to sell them a Petit Syrah from the 70s. But these are beautiful, beautiful wines.
Yeah.
And it really was, I don't want to put any extra self-importance on this, but I will say it really was kind of uncharted waters. And I think in the wine industry and in this digital age, there's so little that's hidden anymore. I think that's part of what's been so exciting about like the wines of Georgia, and people that are excited like me about Greek wine, et cetera, is it still feels like it's cutting edge, or you're in fresh territory.
Right.
And the excitement around, the resurgence of indigenous grapes and things like that. This was kind of like that for us, nobody was talking about these wines. The only way that we really knew if they were going to be any good was to buy them and try them. And
Yeah.
it was amazing how high the quality really was. Obviously not across the board. You know, we learned a lot what
Yeah.
to avoid, but there were so many successes that we really started to just trust the trust the thing. And obviously we were buying them under best case scenario in the region of production, often from the people that made them or from a seller within 100 miles, you know. So it was great, you know. I don't know if somebody would necessarily have that same experience trying to build that list in, you know, Tokyo, but we had a really great great success rate, and it was really emboldening. Yeah.
Right. Awesome. Well, you know, I know from experience it could be quite a conversation when you're talking to a guest and they may not be familiar with, you know, drinking wines as old as something from the 1970s. And so in order to convince them that that's going to be a good decision to spend $800 on a bottle of wine can be quite a conversation. And luckily for me, I have this awesome book here that I can, you know, study, and it's been such a great tool. You know, sometimes I'll even run back into the cellar if someone asks me something that I, you know, really complicated that I don't know. But you didn't have this book. You didn't have anything really like it. So what were some of the obstacles that you faced early on in trying to sell some of these expensive old bottles of wine?
Well, they weren't as expensive, you know, back then as they used to be. And in fact, it was really interesting because I think, you know, still today, the emphasis in California wine, for a lot of understandable reasons, is on the current vintage or even maybe the next vintage. You know, it's very, because that's the vintage people are selling, that's what people are writing about. But there's also that lingering prejudice, as you touched upon, about people not believing that the wines can age. And so, you know, back in the day when we would, for example, one of the ways early on that we bought a lot of wines when we didn't have the option of going directly to the producer, because a lot of producers don't keep libraries, is through auctions. And so we would go to an auction house and, you know, inspect the, you know, whatnot as best we could and make decisions, you know, on the quality. And we would see the Burgundy and the Bordeaux and the Champagne sell for astronomical sums. And then, you know, the old California stuff would be like at the back of the catalog, and it would be like going for like 10, 15, $20 a bottle. And so we could put, or, you know, 50 or even 100, but we could have put wines from the 70s and especially the 80s on the list for like 150, $300, you know, and make a healthy markup that allowed us to charge maybe a little bit less for the current releases so that we could stay competitive, since we were in the area of their production and everybody could look up what things cost anyway. So that was helpful. So there was a kind of, it was an easier sell, I guess. And then
things are a little bit more expensive now. Are you essentially taking responsibility for driving up the price of old Napa Cabernet?
I hope not. I don't know. I don't think I have that power, but thank you.
All right.
But yeah, no, so it was, I mean, people would still look at us kind of cross-eyed, but we won a lot of people over, and like randomly, well, not randomly, we got a lot of attention. So a lot of the media started writing about the wine list. The San Francisco Chronicle, you know, the Advocate, Vintage, Food and Wine named us like top sommeliers in the country in 2013. You know, it was interesting because it was this kind of risky, unproven thing, and we made it work, and we really we really got noticed. So that was.
Do you think in that notoriety, people started to look at the restaurant, the list, and you and Scott as kind of like an authority, so they essentially trusted you?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And like, I still remember one of the coolest moments for me of validation, because obviously that's really nice, right, to get recognized in the press and, you know, whatever. But ultimately, I think you want to please your peers, right? And I remember when a friend of mine who was a longtime sommelier in New York City took on a new restaurant gig, and he called me one day. He goes, "I'm going to build Press East." He's like, "I'm doing what you're doing, but in New York, I think it's going to be great." So,
Yeah.
I thought that was really, really flattering. That was kind of a little like emotional moment for me.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
very cool. So, you have this great list going, and did you start writing while you were in Napa?
Yeah, the idea for the book actually started on the cross country trip to California because I know that I um, wrote about this in the book. So apologies to everybody that actually took the time to read this. I'm going to assume there's not that many. But when I worked at Harvest in Burgundy in 2005, and when I did that, before I went, I read Clive Coates' Cote d'Or cover to cover, and I brought it with me, and I still have it. It's so beat up, and I read it. Anytime I would see a vineyard or drive by a winery, I would go back home at the end of a very long day and read about it again. And so moving to California, knowing that I didn't know much about California wine, knowing that I'd be running an all Napa wine list in Napa Valley and selling, the wines that people made to them. I wanted to study up, and so I tried to buy like the Napa Valley book, and really didn't find a lot. There was a lot of scores, there was a lot of reviews, uh, but there wasn't a lot of what I kind of would consider true scholarship. There were articles, but no like books. Like I wanted to sit with a book on this 10-day trip that we had planned and read it. And I was really startled that didn't really exist. And sorry, my dog's about to walk right across the screen. So go. And so we kind of had the idea. I'd already been writing articles for magazines on like a really part-time basis, not to support myself by any stretch of the imagination, but just to keep myself kind of intellectual.
Prior to writing the book, you were doing writing for other magazines?
Yeah, okay. So I've been writing articles for a variety of magazines, and I just thought, well, how hard could a book be? It's probably like 100 articles stapled together. And I just naively thought, well, maybe I can do this, And so I started to talk to the idea about the idea to other people, and I wouldn't say there was like rapt interest, because we still hadn't kind of proven the thing yet, And so I warmed up to the idea, and after like maybe 9 months on the ground in Napa, when I really started to feel like I had something to say about the area, and was digging into a lot of this great research and sitting down with a lot of the pioneers of Napa. And this is one of the best things about I'm going to take you for a walk because I got to throw my dog outside. He's dressed.
Okay.
No, you weren't outside. One of the great things about being in Napa 12 years ago that really isn't true today is that a lot of the like founders of Napa, that like kind of rebooted Napa in the 60s, were still alive. And it's sad, but we've lost a lot of them. But I knew how lucky I was to be spending time with guys like Joe Phelps and Peter Mondavi, back then, and hearing their stories and taking the time to get to know them. And so I figured out that it was, the moment to do that, and put together a business plan and pitched it to the owner of the restaurant, and he agreed to, give me a loan, and 5 years later there was a book.
Awesome. Well, it took you over 4 years to write the book. What were some of the biggest challenges that you faced along the way in putting this thing together?
Well, I would say, selecting the wineries that went in the book, because despite its size, it's not, in fact, comprehensive. It's a little under 200 wineries. And so, it really was based on what we had at the restaurant. And so, relationships that we had at the restaurant, and with a heavy emphasis on wineries that I tasted heavy verticals from, because I really, it didn't take me very long to realize that, sure, I could write about the appellations and, the soil and all that stuff, but like these old wines, nobody was writing about, and they were so good. And I have a terrible memory. So I wanted to write it all down and remember. And this was just a good way for me to do that. And so I would say, the selection process was difficult. You want to
Yeah.
include everybody if you're going to do a thing, but it wasn't physically possible. And also just doing it while working as a sommelier. In the beginning, I was still working full time. Eventually, Angela Stem came and joined us, and which took a little load off for me, and I could take work 3 or 4 days a week instead of 5 or 6. But I would write from 10 in the morning till we would leave for work at 3, and then we would get home, and maybe I'd write a little bit after midnight and go to sleep and do it again. So it was this really intense schedule, and that looking back, I can't believe that like I had the tenacity to do that. It was a lot of work. It was crazy.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Guys, we're here with award-winning wine writer Kelli White. If you have questions for Kelli, feel free to throw them in the question box on the bottom of your screen. We'll be more than happy to sort through those towards the end of the interview. Napa Valley Then and Now, if you have not seen it, it's a big boy. It's I heard you like talking about the size of it. It's over 1,200 pages long. What did you envision for when you had this, vision of what you were going to do? What did you think it was going to look and feel like? It's incredibly organized. I think even the graphic designer won an award for the graphic design, correct?
Yeah, he won an award. The book won 2 awards. One of which was from the IACP, and then this won the Graphiste Design Award. So. The designer of the book is a great friend and colleague. He is a local guy, a St. Helena guy, very accomplished designer named Michael Vanderbyle, who also does the occasional wine label. So he did, I think probably his most famous is Scarecrow, and he's done like Barber and a handful of other.
Great guest of the restaurant as well.
Yeah, and he had designed, I don't know if it's still true, but he used to design the old menus, and he was just sort of a friend to the place and is still a close personal friend. And so kind of agreed to take on this book, I think also naively on his part, because we didn't have any conversations about expectation of size. But because the book was taking so long, in part because I was working on the floor, we designed it without the manuscript being done. So I know that the size is a bit daunting, but I think kind of word for word, it's probably on par with, any of the like big Parker books that are like big but manageable. It's just that this was sort of designed to look like a coffee table book, but then there was so much text that that it kind of was mismatch of design and text. But so that's kind of why it was so big. But it was startling how big it was. That was not the plan, and I was really upset.
Well, I'll go as far as to say that I don't know if I could do my job and do what I do without this book. It's been an incredible tool for me, and I think I could say the same for Jody and Taylor. It's definitely something that we refer to on a daily basis, and so you did a really fantastic job. Not that you need me to tell you that, but
thank you.
Bravo.
And you had Amanda, I know you had Amanda. She left recently, but obviously she's a walking encyclopedia too. So
Amanda has been probably the most important person to me in this valley since I've been here, and she's a very important person to me. So that I think everyone who knows me knows that I really enjoy her. So 2018, you did an interview with Jeb Dunnick. In that interview, you spent a good portion of time talking about your personal process in regards to lightening up about wine. Can you explain to us what that process was like for you and what you meant by that?
So I haven't read that article in a long time, so I don't really remember what I said, but I was probably referencing the fact that, I think that, and I feel like I can say this because I am close to so many sommeliers and worked as one for so long, but I think sommeliers can be very self-serious, and
for sure.
And I certainly used to be that way, and I think that that's not necessarily that's not always aligned with great hospitality, right? And it kind of took me a while to figure out that as excited as I was by this body of knowledge, just wine in general, and accruing all this information, that you gotta hold something back, right? The guest doesn't always want to hear everything that you know about every little thing, and so that took me a really long time to learn. And part of what kind of drove that home for me was spending time with my family. I don't come from a wine drinking family, but I like to drink wine. So I would bring wine home and share it. And, if they asked me, I would tell them, but I was more aware somehow around my family because I loved them and I didn't want them to ever feel bad about anything, to not come across as in any way kind of superior or pretentious or anything other than warm and easy. And it was always a really good reminder to bring that same approach, back to work on the floor. And also just to sort of relax in general, just to kind of meet people where they are instead of trying to always bring people up to your level. I mean, I think any good interaction involving wine between a sommelier, I guess, like you want them to learn something, if they want to, but I think it's just more important that they feel tended to, and cared for. And so I think that has a lot more to do with what they want than what you have to offer. And so you have to switch your antenna to focus on them more, I think, to really be good at the thing.
Awesome. Yeah, when I read that interview, I related so much to it because I feel that, when guests come into a restaurant and they see a wine list like Press, it's just never ending. They could scroll through for days and not get to the end until the next day. And that could be very intimidating. And we don't want people to feel intimidated when they come into our restaurant or any restaurant for that matter. So it's our job to help them through that and let them know it's going to be okay. So I definitely agree with you on that. Since moving on from Press, you've continued to put out a great amount of content, especially on the Guildsom platform. You write as a staff writer for them. You've won 2 awards. You won the Chairman's Award at the International Wine Writer Awards in London for your essay on phylloxera in 2018. And then in 2019, you also won the same award for your piece on Brettanomyces. What were these awards like for you? What do they mean for you?
They meant a lot to me. Maybe too much. I think I was really corny about it the first time I was nominated. So these are the Louis Roederer International Wine Writing Awards, and it's they're British wine writing awards, and I think the American wine writing community is certainly extremely important. But in some ways, I think it, probably having a lot to do with the historical advantage. Like the heart of wine writing still feels like it beats in London, right? And so to be embraced by that community, which is quite insular, was really meaningful. But I was nominated as Best Emerging Writer. 2016, maybe it was the year. Yeah, it must have been 2015 because you're supposed to be 35 or under, so it must have been 15. And and you get a short list of people that are up for each category, and they tell you when the award ceremony is and can you make it. And not only did I fly all the way to London, I flew my mom out with me, and I took her with me, and we got all dressed up, and we showed up, and no one else was dressed up or had brought anyone, and I'm like Bradley Cooper at the Oscars.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't win that year, and but I had my mom with me to come for me, so it was corny and sweet, and I think looking back, kind of cute. But so when I was nominated last year, 2018, I was also prepared to lose. I had more realistic expectations, but I still wanted to be there. And then I won the Chairman's Award, which is effectively, it sounds like the fanciest award, but it's really like a runners-up award. So I didn't win in the category that I was nominated for, but the chairman felt so moved by my essay, he every so often gives his own award, to something that stood out. And so that was last year. And then this past year, I did win my category. So, it feels great. You go to the ceremony and Jancis Robinson is there, and, Tim Atkin is there, and sometimes Andrew Jefford is there. And it's just it feels cool. It feels cool, especially from somebody that didn't necessarily come from a formal writing background that kind of made this career pivot, relatively late on. Yeah. So I was happy. Yeah.
Awesome. Napa Valley Then and Now obviously received a lot of critical acclaim. or do we have any other books in the works? Is there anything else that you're working on right now in terms of a book?
I have a lot of projects that I was working on and then have been kind of set aside, unfortunately. And that's just so not my personality, so I really hate it. But I've got a book that's like the third finished that I can't really talk about. And then I have a screenplay that's been half finished for like 3 years that I don't really want to talk about. And I'll
Right.
finish it eventually. Like I keep telling myself like quarantine is the time, but then
Yeah.
but then I just keep eating and I lose track of time. So it's not,
Me both.
not happening.
Awesome. Well, I've met you a couple times in person, but I also heard a rumor that you are returning back to the Valley. I know when I first got here in 19, you had just moved to Portland. Are you not in Portland anymore?
Yeah, no, I'm in Napa. I moved here two
You're in
weeks
Napa
ago
right
during
now.
shelter in place. Yeah, and then just basically haven't left this room. So, which is just so bizarre. But yeah, I'm here. I have a new gig that I don't think I can really talk too much about yet, but it's in the one location space, and it's going to be amazing. But it's a little bit soon to dish. But yeah, so I still intend to write the occasional article for Guildsom and a few other magazines I've been talking to. But yeah, I did leave my full time gig at Guildsom, which was very bittersweet because I do think that's a great platform. But they're doing such a good job. If you are still following them, the writers that they have are great. Bryce is doing amazing.
Yeah.
Jennifer piece on phenolics that just came up is like stupendous. They're cranking out really good content still, even without me. Somehow they found the strength to go on. So
Cool. Awesome. Well, Kelli White back in Napa Valley. We love you to have you here. Definitely got to stop and depress once this whole thing blows over
yes.
and grab a drink.
Or
So
text.
it looks like, are we good on time? It looks like we have some questions. Is that okay?
Yeah. How does this work? Can I scroll?
I'll take care of the
Oh,
questions,
okay.
and you just answer if you'd like. So, um, here's a good one. I never met this gentleman. I hear great things about him. Favorite memory of / with Leslie Rudd?
Oh gosh. Oh my God. So many. Oh.
Pulling on the heartstrings.
I love Leslie so much. I know I still miss him and think about him all the time. Um, I yeah, I will say this. I had left the restaurant basically after the book came out. I worked for Antonio Galoni for a couple of years, and then I started working for Guildsom. And I don't think he knew who Galoni was, obviously, but I don't think he understood that Guildsom was like a real job with he just not in that world. And so I think, thought I was like writing a blog, or he just didn't get it. And so he called
Right.
me one day, and with Leslie, everything was like an urgent, brilliant idea. You had to meet immediately and hammer it out. And so I get a call from him one day. This was towards the end of his life, and he said, "Where are you? What are you doing? Can you meet me for lunch?" And so I ran out to meet him, and he's like, "I got a project. I need you on it. It's going to be great. It's a lot of writing. It's everything you're good at, and blah blah blah." And I was like, "Okay, well, tell me about it." He's like, in a minute, let's catch up." And so we had lunch. We caught up, and I told him, what my new job was and the things I was writing, and that it, was a full time job, and I was earning money, and I was, paying my bills. And so the end of lunch,
Right.
like, "So what's the project?" And he goes, "Oh, never mind. I was worried. I didn't think I didn't know if you had any income right now." And he was just basically trying to invent something to kind of keep me fed. And,
Right.
I think was probably driving one day and thought about me and was like, "Is she okay?" And then was going to just create something, to help me. And that was really like, oh God,
That's awesome.
yeah, he was a good guy.
All right, we got this one. No, I don't want to do that one. Sorry, I just jumped in on that. Here, this is a good one. What are some of your favorite wine books?
Wow. So I like the dry stuff. I like the technical books. I've not that it's this is there's certainly a lot of personality in his writing, but I've been digging hard into Ian D'Agata's books. Italian wine in general has never been a real strength of mine. So it's exciting for me on a lot of levels, but also I just love his approach and his writing. Like he is a true intellectual. I mean, but he's also a bon vivant
Yeah.
and, writes with a lot of passion. And, there's something about, I know that people have complicated feelings about Robert Parker. I think especially, younger generation people in the wine industry, but I think if you really take the time to read a lot of what he's written, one thing that always came across in Parker's writing that I loved was just this undying passion for wine, food and wine, and the dinner table and the producers and the whole thing. I mean, that man was just like bursting with passion. And you don't always get that from writers all the time anymore, I don't think. I think some maybe it's just not their personality or their goals are different, but like he had so much love, and I feel that from Ian D'Agata's writing too. And maybe it's because I used to edit his like restaurant reviews for Venice sometimes, where you just clearly the man loves to eat and drink. And I think that it's like never trust a skinny chef, kind of thing. It's like I love when that passion kind of comes through. And so for me to combine the intellectual rigor with that like hedonism is really cool, and not a lot of people do that well. So I've been loving that from him.
Awesome.
What other wine books? I've been reading older stuff too. I really think it's really interesting. I mean, one of the things that I try to write about a lot and lecture about when I was on the road with Guildsom is that we get really caught up in the moment we're in, and I think we think, and writers are really guilty of this. Some lays are too, of whatever the new movement is feels new, and it feels like the real revolution, and it feels like the thing that matters. And if you study historic wine trends at all, you understand that everybody's felt this way about every movement, and that it doesn't detract from, and it shouldn't detract from any of the passion or the spirit, but that there's a kind of a longer view to take on things, and that fashion cycles really do spin around, and things are there's reactions and there's actions and reactions, um, and so I like to study some of the older writers and to see kind of what it was like to have your finger on the pulse in the 70s or the 80s. So I bought recently a bunch of Frank Pryle books, which I don't, some of them are just collected essays from his writing from the New York Times. And that's been really interesting to just read his perspective on what was happening in California and Bordeaux and around the world. And then going back even further, I bought a bunch of old Schoonmaker books, which are like from the 30s and the 40s. Like there's a book of his
Huh.
that I bought called something like Exploring Europe on €4 a day. It's like, and that's
All right.
and drinking really well. So it's interesting. But I like I like to always kind of make sure I maintain a solid perspective by looking backwards as often as I'm looking forward and around.
Excellent. That's a great perspective. Great thing to do. We'll take one more. I don't want to take up too much of your time. This is a good one because we didn't touch on Houndstooth. What was the
Oh,
light that
right.
went off for you and Scott to start Houndstooth?
Well, that light was the darkness of the recession of 2008. It was just this idea that kind of sommeliers were a dying profession and we better get some new skills. But no, we did. This is what we moved out here to do. And I know that, when I, poor Scott, he's not here, but when I tell our story, I kind of gloss over that part for a lot of reasons. One, as a writer, I've always felt I've had a complicated relationship with our brand because I don't want to seem like I have a conflict of interest. So I'm uncomfortable, selling it or promoting it. I very rarely talk about it in my social media. And I think, that's honestly a shame because I do think the wines are very good, and they're important, and it's something that we do together and that we love, although it's much, much more of his baby. But I don't talk about it too much. But we started making wine in 2011, and I don't know if we have like time for the whole story, but it was a really it was another extension of how much the Napa community just really embraced us right away, because as kind of New Yorkers, and outsiders coming here, the community really did wrap their arms around us, from the beginning, not just with the wine list. And obviously we were buying things from people around here, so that's always endearing, but in other ways too. And when we started to kind of tell people that we were looking to make wine, I mean, just immediately the offers of like Rick Foreman let us borrow his truck, his pickup truck. He's like, here's the keys to my truck with his like, you know, right wing bumper stickers on it, driving around. And, you know, like the guys at Antica sold us some fruit, and then we got like hinted onto other fruit, and like Denny Malbec gave us some used barrels, and you know, and Dan Petrowski and Stefan Vivier like answered our phone calls at 10 p.m. when we thought we had like screwed everything up. And it was just this really, it's taken off since then. We're still only making 200 to 300 cases a year, but it really was born of just the community being like, okay, you want to do this thing? Here's some help, you know, and we don't want to necessarily need anything in return. So, so that was really beautiful. You know,
I've had the same experience. This community is so nurturing, and it's one of those things that you really have to experience and live here to understand it. And so I'm extremely happy to be a part of this community, and I'm extremely happy that you're back. That's definitely a great thing, and I know a lot of people are expressing that as well. Jonah is here in the chat right now. He says, "Welcome home, Kelli." Yeah. So thank you so much for taking time. I know you're a busy person, and we very much appreciate you talking to us. And it was such a great conversation. Please, once this whole thing is over, come into press and we'll chat a little bit more.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
And hopefully I can see your comments. Sorry, I'm an old lady. Okay.
Yeah, so
bye.
Oh, people.
Jonah.
Alrighty.
Bye.
Bye. Take care. Awesome, guys. Great conversation with the one and only Kelli White. She's such a really smart and intelligent person. And I honestly, I read this book every single day. So thank you to her for writing such a fantastic book. I'm taking a little bit of a breather tomorrow, but I will be back on Friday with a really cool guest, a historic vintner, somebody who is from St. Helena, was born and raised in St. Helena, owns a winery in St. Helena, and the wines are some of my favorite. So I look forward to that. See you soon. Cheers.